than half from the year before, as there was a move to online training more than in person. Continuing from the end of this reporting period, the focus remained on increasing the number of online training and development opportunities available citywide. And to support this, when we conducted the RFP process for a new online training vendor, we looked at the possibility of using an integrated talent management system rather than strictly an online training. In doing so, we executed a contract in February of this year with Cornerstone On Demand, and were able to purchase modules for learning, onboarding, performance, and succession planning. We were able to launch learning citywide at the beginning of this fiscal year, as well as performance to a few pilot departments. We're currently in the process of building onboarding, which will be launched to a few pilot departments this month. And beginning of next calendar year, we'll be implementing the succession planning module, which will help us assess an employee's existing skills and their training needs to help support their development and career goals. Our hope is to utilize these online systems as a way to reach employees citywide to help create a better and more engaging employee experience.
Very good. Probably my area of concern in terms of this kind of training is a focus on succession planning, because we're obviously going to lose a fair number of experienced employees. So focusing on training of their potential successors and mentoring programs and other techniques, I think will be pretty critical. So how carefully have we looked at this, and what kind of programs are we looking at?
We're also concerned with that. Our focus is on making sure that the people who are still here after a lot of people retire have the skills needed to assume the new roles. We've just launched a mentoring program, a pilot program in the personnel department, and we hope to roll that out citywide shortly. We'll just see how well that's working and make some adjustments, and then we'll roll it out soon. And we have discussions to add more supervisory and leadership type of training to our library of training to make sure that the less experienced employees get those leadership skills needed to fill those gaps.
And what do you think the timeline is before we have everything fully up and running? 'Cause obviously I think we're all aware there could be a boatload of people that at least reach retirement age and could retire, so we want to be adequately prepared for that.
Right, I mean, to put the training in place that we need with our current budget would require a lot of in-house work, which would take longer, so maybe 2-3 years. And depending on the budget situation, if we purchase off-the-shelf training, we would be able to have that training available much sooner.
So obviously something we should be looking at more carefully in the next budget year, and
yes,
maybe even sooner than that. All right, any other questions, comments? Mr. Rue?
Quick question. Thank you, Councilman. This, and as you stated, this is a very important item because, as you know, we're going to have 40+% of our entire workforce eligible for retirement. So I'm very interested in any kind of training and development or continuing education opportunities. So how do employees find out about the online training academy, and or all the opportunities here? How aggressive are we, and how thorough are we in our outreach?
Yeah, we do this on a couple of different levels. We send out announcements from our office citywide to let them know about various trainings, whether it's mandatory training they're required to take or new trainings that we've purchased. And we also work with training coordinators in each city department, and we give them information and ask them to disseminate that to their own employees. So we're communicating with employees as much as possible.
Do you have any plans to expand on that outreach, possibly? Because I know, being on council for about 1.5 years, I wanted to make sure my staff had opportunities for, just my personal staff to have opportunities, and I don't think we were aware of these opportunities.
Sure, we could always do more, definitely.
Okay. And what about expansion on the, not the required courses, but the, I guess the online training academy, where they're more, extra, right? Or extra opportunities?
For different training courses?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking to expand the library of training available to city employees. We were recently working with ITA and the library to access lynda.com, which has thousands of different courses. And there still may be some options there to provide that to city employees. But we agree, we want to expand the amount of training available.
I'd be supportive of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we all would. So take that as encouragement to do so as we move forward in the process and hopefully the budget process. Any further questions or comments? If not, I would recommend that we note and file this report, and we will do that without objection. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 8.
Item number 8, motion Corretz, Englander, Fuentes, relative to expediting the workers' compensation benefit process for all city employees.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Greg Dion, Assistant General Manager with the Personnel Department. Along with me today is Dave Noltemeyer, who is the Division Chief for the Workers' Compensation Division in the Personnel Department. We've been working with the LAPD and LA Fire Department on preparing a more comprehensive report, which we will be submitting shortly in the near future. But for today, I'm here to give you a quick overview of what we've been working on and take any questions, obviously. Just to put things in context, the department receives in workers' comp claims approximately 7,000 claims a year, and approximately 3,000 of those are with the LA Police Department. We are working on approximately 14,000 open claims at any one time. Those claims generate various medical requests. We actually receive up to 260,000 medical requests a year that our Workers' Comp Division processes. Almost 90% of those are processed through our work comp analysts or our third-party administrators, and they're approved at that first step. The next step is that we have additional requests that are more complex, and they go through what's called a utilization review process. And they're sent out to our third-party contractor who reviews it through a medical panel as to whether medical requests should be approved by a medical provider or physician. And again, we approve almost 90% of that. There are a small portion then that are appealed to an independent medical review panel, and that really makes up a very small percentage of the medical requests each year. Some of the things that we are working on to expedite the process, we are looking at first in terms of ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution process, just to resolve the claims. We started that process in 2008 with 4 unions or 4 MOUs, and that covered about 8,000 employees. We're expanding that to the rest of the civilian population, or most of it. We are meeting with the Police Protective League, and we've been meeting with them for the last couple of months on also an ADR program, and we are cautiously optimistic that we'll reach an agreement on some sort of ADR process. In terms of the civilian claims, we've seen in terms of the ADR process, the one that's in place right now, claims that are not in the ADR process take about 5 years to resolve. In the ADR process, they're resolved in about 3 years. So we see almost a 40% reduction through an ADR process. In terms of utilization review, going forward, one of the things we did within the last few months is assigned 1 work comp analyst to our return to work program to concentrate on bringing employees back to work sooner. And what was happening is we'd have analysts work on individual cases, but not one person looking at just focused on return to work, and we've changed that in the last few months. Going forward in terms of our budget for next year, it's still in the process, but we are looking at potentially creating a special unit within workers' comp made up of a few people to look at the more complex cases that are taking time to process through the system. Why is that? And so we're looking at that as well. So that's generally the overview today. We are going to submit a more comprehensive report along with the LA Fire Department and LA Police Department, but we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Obviously, putting a person focused on return to work, I'm sure would make a significant difference. Is one person enough? Does that really cover all the pieces, or to do this right, would additional personnel be valuable?
It certainly would be helpful. Each analyst is still looking at every case. They have their individual cases. We are having now one person more focused on all the cases as a broader overview, and it seems to be working. There's more communication with the departments on particular cases. So actually, yes, it would be helpful to have additional resources, but we just started this a few months ago, and I think we need to see how it plays out over the next 6 months to a year.
So if it turns out to be as valuable as you expect, you might ask for more resources to make sure we're getting people returned to work more quickly.
That is a possibility.
It seems like that would be a win-win for the city and the employee and the whole process. So it's obviously an important area of focus. And you know, I started this process when there was an article in the LA Times pointing out that we could return people to work more quickly, but we didn't have the focus on doing that. So this sounds pretty positive. Other questions, comments? If not, we will return this to you to finish your report and come back to us once that is completed. We approve that this motion without objection, presumably. Yes. So we will approve this without objection.
Thank you.
And thank you for your good work so far, and we look forward to hearing more. Item number 10.
Item 10, CAO and Board of Fire Commissioners reports relative to utilizing a public-private partnership to create an additional nurse practitioner response unit. This matter was considered by the Public Safety Committee on October 26, 2016.
Morning, committee members. Janice Yu, Office of the CAO.
Dr. Mark Eckstein, EMS Medical Director, LAFD.
So before you, as was mentioned, this report has been heard through and approved through the Public Safety Committee. The request is from the Fire Department to staff and deploy a nurse practitioner response unit from Fire Station 58 in Council District 5 in a public-private partnership with Cedars-Sinai Medical Center to address low acuity 911 calls, including 911 frequent users throughout the community served by Cedars-Sinai. This includes activation of a reserve ambulance, assigning one firefighter paramedic to the MPRU, and creation of a new emergency medical service nurse practitioner classification to complete the unit. Cedars-Sinai has provided a one-time donation of $159,000 to cover the salary and related costs of the EMS nurse practitioner for 1 year. This report has come through this committee because the request is for creation of a new classification, which is the EMS nurse practitioner, and approval of a resolution authority through the 16-17 fiscal year.
So what was the job classified as before this request for a new classification?
Currently, there is a EMS nurse practitioner supervisor that is staffing the existing nurse practitioner response unit, and the department can speak more on that.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners and Council members. We have a first nurse practitioner response unit in the field now, finishing their 1-year pilot that was funded by the Mayor's Innovation Fund and also some private sources. And the program has been very successful. So in the interest of further reducing workload on our firefighters and paramedics, particularly to offload the low acuity calls and mental health patients and help homeless individuals and vulnerable adults, we're looking to expand the nurse practitioner response concept. So this is a first of what we hope to be several public-private partnerships. And in the interest of minimizing the expense to taxpayers, we're reaching out to several large healthcare organizations, and Cedars is the first one that stepped up. And the plan is they'll pay for the salary of the EMS nurse practitioner. That's the new civil service classification. And that individual will be partnered with a firefighter paramedic. And again, the goal is they'll be responding predominantly to the low acuity calls and free up our firefighters and paramedics to respond to time-critical fires and EMS responses.
And should we be looking at contracting out this position for more flexibility? Does it work as well in-house? What do we think?
So we're requesting approval to make this individual a city employee. The current position we have is an EMS nurse practitioner supervisor. So again, this is a non-sworn individual who's expert at dealing with the types of patients that the nurse practitioner response unit is geared towards. And these types of calls are taking an increasing toll on our scarce emergency resources. So sending fire companies and paramedics out to patients with mental health emergencies and chronic medical problems and EMS super uses is obviously inefficient and compromising response times where minutes matter. So the concept is this would be all under the autonomy and oversight of the fire department, but we're reaching out to our stakeholders and community partners such as Cedars-Sinai and others to offset the cost by pay for the salary by donating the salary equivalent to pay for the EMS NP, which would be a salaried city employee.
Okay, other questions or comments? Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Do you all have some, even if it's just speculative, predictions about how this will impact particular stations or particular areas? So I know 103rd Street, 57, 66, the stations in my district, the officers routinely say half of their time is on non-clinical, non-violent mental health patients, most of whom are homeless. So do you all have any calculations about what impact this has on just your average station?
Yes, sir. We have preliminary data from our pilot program. As you know, our first unit initially was housed at Station 64 in Watts. Then we strategically moved it further north to Station 15, their USC main campus. We have them now as one of their primary missions responding to mental health emergencies. So they free up our emergency resources on site. They perform medical clearance and then transport these mental health patients rather than to the overburdened emergency departments, but they take these individuals directly to a psychiatric urgent care facility. There's one at MLK, there's one by USC, there's a new one on the west side, there's also one up in Sylmar. We have preliminary data. They started running on mental health patients after we collaborated with the LAPD's mental evaluation unit, and they've responded to over 60 mental health patients in the last few months, and they're releasing all the fire companies on scene. And also the other benefit is often not only these mental health patients, when they're transported to an emergency department, don't get any mental health counseling in a timely manner, but they're usually in the emergency department for hours and sometimes days, and that results in wall time for our paramedics when they come in with patients who need acute medical attention. So we do have very compelling metrics from our first unit, our pilot program, but the mental health focus has been very, very successful. We're working with Department of Mental Health, with LAPD, with Exodus, which is subcontracted by the Department of Health Services, who run these psychiatric urgent care facilities. And this is patients who obviously need attention, but it's something that the emergency healthcare system hasn't been well designed for. So the current policies in effect for our paramedics and firefighters now is when they respond to these mental health patients, they have to take them to the closest emergency department, even if those emergency departments don't have any psychiatric care. So this is obviously much better for these individuals and frees up our firefighters and paramedics to run on more time-critical patients. And again, our preliminary data from our first unit is very, very compelling. Out of these 64 psychiatric patients they've responded on, they've transported 60 to psychiatric urgent care facilities in lieu of an emergency department and released our field resources on every one of those. Thank you.
So when they bring them to a more appropriate psychiatric emergency care facility, do the personnel still have to wait with them while they're being treated, or can they basically hand them off at that point, and because they are being treated and not just waiting in the halls for 10 hours?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So these are freestanding psychiatric urgent care facilities. We have agreements with their leadership that the patient could be transported by one of two means. LAPD is usually on scene, and if LAPD puts these individuals on a psychiatric involuntary hold at 5150, our nurse practitioner response unit does medical clearance, and LAPD may transport the individual to the psychiatric urgent care facility or Exodus facility. If our NPRU does the transport, they're in and out usually in under 10 minutes, so they give them priority. So the patient's never seen an emergency department, and they get the care they need in a timely manner, and our paramedics and firefighters don't have to transport these patients to an emergency department and take the wall. So it's a freestanding psych urgent care, and usually they're in and out in 10 minutes.
That sounds like an incredible, again, a win-win for everybody, including the patient.
Most definitely.
Going to an emergency facility that doesn't treat psychiatric and sitting around for hours basically it almost seems like a waste of time. Although we can't just ignore them, but it's almost an institutionalized way to ignore them. So how extensive is this new program? What areas does it cover, and what areas would still get the old treatment of just being stuck in an emergency room?
So the proposal on the table here is to have our second nurse practitioner response unit. They'll be working on a 4-10 schedule, 4 days a week, 10 hours a day. They'll be housed at Station 58, so they'll be covering the west side and mid-city area and parts of Hollywood. Again, their focus, like our current unit is, again, on low acuity patients who don't necessarily need ambulance transport to an emergency department. They could do treat and release on scene because they have a much wider scope of practice than our paramedics do. Focusing on mental health patients and also our EMS super users. These are folks who call 911 sometimes hundreds of times per year. So we're trying to eventually get these covered in all parts of the city. We have very positive ongoing discussions with other health partners. So what we have currently covers South LA and parts of downtown. This would be predominantly the west side. And again, it's a 4-10 schedule, but I think the pilot program is extremely compelling. And then just, if I may, on the mental health patients, in terms of the scope of how severe this problem is, in 2015, the LAFD responded to over 11,500 patients for known mental health emergencies, which that's just the ones by dispatch, which resulted in the dispatch of over 20,000 fire engines and ambulances. So, as you correctly mentioned, sir, this clearly is a much better level of care for these individuals. They get mental health care almost immediately upon going to the correct facility, and our paramedics and firefighters who are beyond busy, it frees them up to run time-critical fire and EMS calls.
Now, I think we should be looking at expanding the program citywide as soon as we can, because it's obvious. I doubt we've done a study of how many hours we could save citywide, but intuitively it seems like a ridiculously huge number of hours just because of the amount of standing around time for folks that transport the mentally ill to inappropriate facilities, when we could do exactly the opposite, and those units would spend very little time at the facilities themselves. So I certainly would encourage you to look at expanding the program even further, more quickly. And if community health organizations wind up footing the bill for a good chunk of it, and we can do that and replicate it citywide, seems like we'd get a huge boost in efficiency and have more of our folks continuing to be available to respond to health emergencies and probably reduce our response times. So all sounds very positive.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the thoroughness of your report. A couple of questions, just kind of riffing off of your last answer about the 410 schedule. So, our firefighters are 24/7. 410, I'm just wondering how you all respond to scheduling around when people actually, if there are trends around when people actually have mental health emergencies, and when the calls come in and how the schedules are arranged around that, or is it just a straight 410? The second thing is, I'm a little bit, this is a very exciting program. It's particularly exciting to me. Every time I've ridden out at every station in my district, when I've ridden out with firefighters, it's been 100% mental health calls. Like, I haven't gotten to go to a fire yet. So I'm still waiting to be able to use the water hose. So I appreciate this, but we have a grant now. I think the chair pointed out, this seems like it's common sense. But right now it doesn't appear that there's a way to fund this on an ongoing basis, and so I'm curious as to whether or not that's something you all have given some thought. So 2 questions: one about the scheduling and it being flexible based on when people call, and then the long-term thinking for this type of program, because it seems like there's a compelling case for it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your questions. I agree completely. Certainly, ideally, there would be many more units, and they'd be on a 24/7 schedule, like our firefighters and paramedics. Unfortunately, the way the current system works, because it's a salaried employee, they're on a straight 410 schedule. These calls happen all day long. We haven't seen a preponderance. Obviously, our volume is lower during the night shift, as it were, after midnight. So because the EMS NP is a salaried employee, they're on a straight 410 schedule. We did experiment with them coming in later, leaving later, and their desire, quite frankly, is to work a 24-hour shift, and the requests from the members in the field in those impacted neighborhoods have been for more coverage, because the impact to the field and their community has been nothing short of phenomenal. So my understanding in terms of the ability of the city to allow this individual to work beyond 40 hours a week because of FLSA implications is really slim to none. But these types of calls happen routinely. And then if, in terms of the super users, if our members go on an individual who's calling EMS repeatedly, hundreds of times a year, they'll notify our nurse practitioner response unit, who will then schedule a follow-up during their work schedule. And we have partnering with a nonprofit 501c3 organization who has provided us a full-time social worker at no cost to the city, who will do an in-home visit and try to help these individuals navigate through the healthcare system with insurance and medical home and so forth. But the goal is to help these individuals, these vulnerable patients, get them out of the EMS system into preventive care, and then free up our firefighters and paramedics for the time-critical emergencies. So we're kind of locked into a 410 schedule, as I understand the city's system, because it's a salaried employee. But we do have some flexibility in terms of when their start and finish time, sir.
In terms of the finding funding to continue and expand the program, there is some funding, partial funding in the 16-17 budget for the original MPRU, and this just started this year. The first MPRU in January 2016, and so the idea was to do some evaluation on how successful the unit was with some of the innovation grant funding before pursuing further expanding the units. And our recommendation from the CAO is to look at any more expansion and continuation of the program in the context of the annual budget process.
And I certainly encourage the department to look at this not as a separate item to fund, but as part of their overall deployment, because we're certainly struggling to hire enough firefighters to get the department completely up to where it should be. And at least until we're able to do that, if it's deployed properly, it seems like it would reduce the demand on the other sworn officers in the department, and if it's integrated, it could sort of substitute for that until we're able to fully staff up, and even then probably would continue to make sense. So any way possible, I'd certainly like to encourage the department to look at how to expand this program dramatically. It's clearly a win-win for everybody, and I can't imagine once we study it that it isn't a win for us fiscally as well. So no other comments or questions. I would ask that we approve the CAO's recommendations in this report without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your good work on this. Item number 11.
Item number 11, CAO report relative to amendments to the Memorandum of Understanding for bargaining units represented by the Coalition of Los Angeles City Unions.
Marita Aspen from the Office of the CAO. This is a CAO report requesting approval of amendments to 12 Memoranda of Understanding between the city and bargaining units that are represented by the Coalition of Los Angeles City Unions. After we completed extensive negotiations on the 19 MOUs with the coalition, we still had a few issues that were unresolved. We agreed to take those issues to mediation. We received a mediator's report, and at the end of that process, we all agreed that we would abide by the mediator's recommendations. So these amendments are implementing those recommendations across many city departments. The fiscal impact of these amendments is about $3.2 million annually. The bulk of that is going to be in LAPD, which is about $1.4 million, to change to some additional compensation to principal and senior detention officers. But we are asking approval of the amendments to implement these changes that were negotiated with the coalition.
What's the status of the targeted local hire program?
Actually, that has been moving along very well. We've had several meetings, and there's representatives here from the coalition that might want to chime in. But some of these amendments actually do implement salaries for some of the targeted local hire positions, and we're getting ready to bring forward the report on that very shortly. It's been moving along very well.
Good to hear. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll approve the CAO's recommendations without objection. Item number 12.
Item number 12, CAO report relative to the 2016-19 Memorandum of Understanding for the Firefighters and Fire Captains Bargaining Unit, MOU 23.
Marita Aspen with the CAO's office again. This is a CAO report requesting approval of the 2016 to 2019 Memorandum of Understanding for the Firefighters and Fire Captains Unit. As you can see from the report, the general salary increases mirror those that were previously approved for LAPD officers. That would be 4% this fiscal year, 4% next fiscal year, and then we have an additional third year, which will be a 2% increase. The fiscal impact of this MOU for fiscal year 16-17 is approximately $19 million, with a total annual ongoing cost of approximately $46.9 million. We're requesting approval of the MOU, and representatives of the United Firefighters of Los Angeles City are here to answer questions as well.
Anything special in terms of the fire department's preparations to deal with secession planning and to try to retain veteran firefighters?
Well, we're hoping that the general salary increases, and we will assist in that, incentivizing folks to stay a little bit longer. We also are increasing the longevity bonus for firefighters immediately, and we're hoping that that will also lead to retention.
Very good. Any other questions, comments? If not, we will also approve this CAO's report recommendations without objection.
Thank you.
Item number 13.
Item 13, Department of Animal Services report relative to increased reimbursement to veterinary partners for the spay and neuter of shelter animals.
Good morning. Dana Brown, Los Angeles Animal Services. This particular proposal may look a little familiar to you, and if so, that's because earlier this year you did approve a similar proposal for public vouchers, which is for the spay and neuter of animals that belong to members of the public. So this proposal is for shelter animals, and by shelter animals I mean those that are taken for spay neuter by the department from the shelter, either in preparation for adoption or in preparation for pickup by the newly adopted family, or finally after a medical deferral. So as you will note, the proposal brings parity to the reimbursement rates for public animals as well as and shelter animals, which is $70 for cats and $125 for rabbits and dogs. And I am available for any questions that you may have.
Yeah, the department's report details a total of over $1 million in spay and neuter expenses, and that this would increase reimbursements by 537,000.
Right.
So-
Actually, what I did is it's kind of hard to sort of project the usage because the department is engaged in so many activities aimed at increasing the usage. But if I were to use the numbers from last fiscal year, that's what the impact would have been. But next year, this particular fiscal year, we do expect a large increase in the usage because some of the other programs that Council has adopted, most recently the low-income self-identification program.
Yeah, the reason I asked this question is the Animal Sterilization Fund only receives $1.1 million each year. So if we're expending roughly $1.5 million, at some point, it seems like the program would be short of funds.
The Animal Sterilization Fund receives an allocation from the general fund as well as monies from revenues from licensing, private donations, and over the years, we have not been able to spend the money as quickly or as efficiently as we should have been able to, largely because of these rates are, long overdue to be raised. We were paying sort of a low reimbursement rate to these vet partners, and we expect that, being able to pick up the expenditure from this fund is going to happen with these additions. But the fund is pretty healthy right now, and we are working with the CAO's office as well as the mayor's office with our budget in order to identify some efficient spending so that the money can be used for the reason that it was allocated, spay neuter.
So you're not anticipating coming up short?
No, we are not. We're not. We also, from this fund, we also fund our spay neuter vans. We're increasing our vans, and so we don't anticipate a shortage. And this particular year, the particular fiscal year that we're in, we didn't even get a general fund allocation yet because our fund is so endowed right now. So we are going to be using what we have, and we will expect that if we do end up being shorter later on, that the general fund will make its contribution as normal.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, if not, we will approve the recommendations in your report. Thank you very much. Any items before us? Not?
That is all.
And no other public speakers, so we are adjourned.